You are going to die. Not physically, not today, but some part of you already has, or is about to. And here's the strange part. The most famous resurrection story in human history was never really about a man coming back from physical death. It was a coded message about something happening inside you. Right now, something psychologists didn't fully understand until thousands of years after the story was first told. For centuries, people have debated the resurrection of Christ as a historical or religious event, something you either believe in or you don't. But today we're going to look at it through a completely different lens, the lens of psychology, specifically the work of Carl Jung. And what we find is something startling, a blueprint for psychological rebirth that appears not just in Christianity, but in nearly every culture, every mythology, every human psyche throughout history. By the end of this video, you're going to understand why this ancient story might actually be describing something you have already experienced or something you desperately need to experience. You probably didn't even realize it. Let's start with the basic shape of the story, because it matters more than most people realize. A man is betrayed by someone close to him. He is stripped of everything: his dignity, his followers, his control over his own fate. He suffers immensely, publicly, completely alone in his final moments. He dies, and then, after 3 days in complete darkness, in a sealed tomb, he returns, transformed, no longer bound by the limitations he had before. Now strip away the specific religious names for a moment and ask yourself, does this pattern sound familiar? Betrayal, loss of control, suffering, complete darkness, and then transformation and return. Carl Jung would tell you this pattern is not unique to Christianity at all. It's something he called an archetype, a universal psychological pattern embedded in what he called the collective unconscious, a shared layer of the human mind that produces the same symbolic stories again and again across completely unconnected cultures. Jung noticed something remarkable when he studied mythology from around the world. Osiris in Egypt is killed, dismembered, and reassembled, then reborn. Persephone in Greek mythology descends into the underworld and returns each spring. Inanna in Sumerian mythology is stripped naked, killed, hung on a hook, and later revived. Different names, different cultures, different centuries, but the same underlying pattern: descent into darkness, followed by rebirth. Jung believed this wasn't a coincidence. He believed the human psyche itself is built to go through cycles of death and rebirth, psychologically speaking, and that these ancient stories were humanity's attempt to put language and image around an experience almost too deep to describe directly. So what does psychological death actually look like? It's not about your body dying, obviously. It's about the death of a version of yourself, a version you've been clinging to, a version that no longer works, a persona you built to survive, a set of beliefs you inherited but never examined, an identity built entirely around other people's expectations. Jung called the false self we present to the world the persona, essentially a mask. And sometimes, life forces that mask to crack. A devastating breakup, the loss of a career you built your identity around, a public failure, a betrayal by someone you trusted completely. These events don't just hurt. They force a kind of psychological death. The version of you that existed before that event literally cannot continue existing in the same way afterward. This is why the crucifixion resonates so deeply on a psychological level, even for people who aren't religious. It's not really about one man on a cross 2,000 years ago. It's about the universal human experience of being stripped down to nothing, betrayed by someone close to you, humiliated publicly, abandoned in your darkest moment, forced to face suffering completely alone. If you've ever gone through something like this, and almost everyone has in some form, you already understand this story on a level deeper than theology. You've lived a version of it. Now here's where it gets really interesting psychologically: the tomb. 3 days in complete darkness, sealed away, hidden from the world. This is not wasted time in the story. It's essential. Jung talked extensively about something he called the Nigredo, a term he borrowed from alchemy, meaning the blackening, the necessary period of darkness and dissolution that must happen before any real transformation can occur. You cannot skip this stage. You cannot rush from crisis directly to healing without first sitting in the darkness. Modern psychology confirms this too. Healing from trauma, grief, major life transitions, none of it happens instantly. There's always a period that feels like nothing is happening, like you're stuck, like you're buried, and that period is not a failure. It's the process itself. Think about your own life for a second. Have you ever gone through a period where you felt completely lost, like your old identity had collapsed, but you hadn't yet become whoever you were supposed to become next? That in-between space, that's the tomb. It's uncomfortable, it's disorienting, and our modern culture is terrible at tolerating it. We want the breakthrough without the breakdown. We want the light without sitting in the dark first. But psychologically and mythologically, that's simply not how transformation works. We live in a world of instant results, instant messages, instant gratification, and so when our own inner world refuses to move at that pace, we panic. We assume something has gone wrong, when really, we've just entered a stage of the process that has existed since the beginning of human storytelling. I want to pause here for a second, because if any part of this is resonating with you, if you've ever felt like you were in your own version of that tomb, sitting in darkness, unsure if you'd ever come out the other side, I want you to know that feeling itself is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It might actually be a sign that something powerful is happening beneath the surface, even if you can't see it yet. And if this video is helping you make sense of an experience like that, do me a favor right now and hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel keep making videos that explore psychology and meaning like this. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that too, because we dig into ideas just like this every single week. Ancient wisdom translated into practical, modern psychological insight. Okay, let's keep going, because the resurrection itself is where this gets even more powerful. So what actually happens at the resurrection, psychologically speaking? It's not a return to the old self. This is crucial, and it's something a lot of people miss. The resurrected Christ, in the story, is described as transformed, recognizable but different, able to appear and disappear, no longer bound by the same limitations. This is symbolic language for a very real psychological truth. You don't heal by going back to who you were before the crisis. You heal by becoming something new, something that carries the wisdom of the darkness, but is no longer limited by the old identity that had to die in the first place. This is where Jung's concept of individuation comes in, the lifelong process of becoming your true, whole self, integrating the parts of you that you've hidden, denied, or repressed. Individuation almost always requires some kind of symbolic death first, the death of who you thought you had to become who you actually are. The resurrection isn't just a miracle that happened once. In Jung's framework, it's a psychological process that can happen to any of us, potentially many times throughout our lives. You might go through your own version of death and rebirth in your 20s, again in your 40s, again after a major loss later in life. Each time, the pattern repeats, but the version of you that emerges carries a little more wholeness than the one before. Let's talk about the stone rolled away from the tomb for a second, because even this small detail carries psychological weight. In the story, the stone isn't rolled away from the inside. It's rolled away, and Christ emerges. Psychologically, this speaks to something important. You often can't force your own transformation through sheer willpower alone. Real change tends to happen when you stop fighting the darkness, when you surrender to the process instead of resisting it, when you allow the necessary period of dissolution to run its course rather than trying to control or rush it. The stone moves when it's ready to move, not necessarily when you demand it to. This is hard for a lot of us to accept, especially people who pride themselves on discipline and control, but some parts of transformation cannot be forced, they can only be allowed. There's also something powerful in the detail that when Mary Magdalene first encounters the resurrected Christ, she doesn't recognize him immediately. Think about that. Someone who knew him intimately doesn't immediately recognize him after his transformation. This mirrors something incredibly real about psychological rebirth. People who knew the old version of you may not immediately recognize who you've become, and that can be disorienting for them and for you. Growth often means outgrowing relationships, roles, or self-images that used to define you. And that transition can feel lonely even as it feels like liberation. Some people in your life will adjust and grow alongside the new version of you, and some won't. And learning to accept that is its own kind of psychological maturity. So what do we actually do with all of this? How do you apply an ancient resurrection story to your actual life? First, if you're currently in your own version of the tomb, going through a period of darkness, confusion, or loss of identity, understand that this isn't necessarily a sign of failure. It might be the necessary Nigredo before something new emerges. Second, resist the urge to rush the process or force a return to your old self. The goal was never to go backward. The goal is to allow something new and more whole to take shape. Third, when transformation does happen, expect that not everyone will recognize the new you immediately, and that's okay. It doesn't mean the transformation isn't real. And fourth, remember that the stone rolls away in its own time. Your job isn't to force the ending. It's to stay present through the darkness without abandoning yourself in the process. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that the impediment to action advances action, that what stands in the way becomes the way. The resurrection story tells us something remarkably similar in symbolic form. The crucifixion, the darkness, the tomb, none of it was separate from the resurrection. It was the necessary path toward it. Your own darkest periods might not be separate from your transformation either. They might be the very thing making it possible. The pain you're avoiding right now might be the exact doorway you need to walk through. I'm curious, has there ever been a moment in your life that felt like your own personal tomb, a period of darkness before something in you fundamentally changed? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. And your story might be exactly the reminder someone else needs today, that the darkness isn't the end of the story, it's just the part right before the transformation. And before you go, one more question worth sitting with. If part of you has to die for something new to be born, what part of yourself do you think might be ready to be let go of right now? You don't have to answer that publicly, but I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts in the comments if you're willing to share. Because sometimes just naming it out loud is the first step toward letting it go. Have you ever wondered why the image of Christ has endured for over 2,000 years? Not just as a figure of religion, but as a symbol that seems to live in the depths of the human psyche? Whether you are spiritual or not, the story of Christ holds a mirror to something universal, the process of inner transformation. It's not only about belief in God, but also about the journey of awakening that every human soul must face. Behind the historical figure lies a timeless psychological truth. Christ's crucifixion, death, and resurrection represent the death of the ego and the birth of the true self. From a psychological point of view, Christ is not just a man who lived in a specific time. He is a symbol of the inner self, the divine spark that exists within each of us. Carl Jung saw Christ as an archetype, an image that expresses the process of individuation, the journey toward wholeness. When the Gospels say the kingdom of God is within you, it's not a metaphor for moral goodness. It is a direct pointer to an inner state of consciousness. When read symbolically, the story of Christ's life describes the path that every individual must take to transcend illusion, confront their shadow, and awaken to a deeper identity beyond personality. Let's start with the birth story. The Christ child is born in a manger, surrounded by animals, far from the comfort of a palace. On the surface, this is a tale of humility, but symbolically, it reveals something profound. Divine consciousness is born in the most humble, unconscious part of the psyche. The animals represent our instincts, our primal drives, the earthy part of human nature. For light to enter the world, it must first be born among the shadows, within the unconscious. This is why transformation often begins in moments of darkness, confusion, or despair. The birth of inner light always happens in the stable of the soul, not in its throne room. As the story unfolds, we meet Herod, the ruler who tries to kill the newborn child. Herod represents the ego, the part of us that fears the new awareness that threatens its control. The ego resists awakening because it knows that when the light of consciousness grows, its reign begins to end. In your own life, you've likely felt this resistance. The voice that says, "Don't change, stay safe, you're fine as you are." But every step toward transformation challenges that voice. Herod's pursuit is the psyche's natural defense mechanism, a fear of death, not of the body, but of identity itself. Then comes the baptism in the Jordan River. Water has always symbolized emotion, intuition, and cleansing. When Christ descends into the river, it signifies immersion into the unconscious. To begin transformation, one must confront what lies beneath the surface, the buried memories, the unhealed wounds, the forgotten parts of the self. Emerging from the water, he hears the voice of the Father saying, "This is my beloved Son." Psychologically, this moment represents the recognition of one's divine origin, that beyond your fears, beyond your story, there is something sacred observing it all. You are not the storm. You are the awareness behind it. After baptism, Christ retreats into the desert for 40 days. This desert is not only a place, but a state of consciousness, the emptiness one must face when the distractions of the world are stripped away. There, he is tempted by the devil, which is not an external being, but the inner voice of the ego offering shortcuts to power, pleasure, and validation. Every spiritual seeker faces these same temptations, to seek happiness through control, recognition, or dominance rather than through truth. The desert teaches the soul that true strength comes not from possession, but from surrender. And then comes the central image, the crucifixion. Perhaps no symbol in history is as misunderstood or as powerful. From a psychological lens, the cross represents the point where the human and divine intersect. It is the moment when the false self, built on fear, pride, and illusion, is nailed to the structure of reality and dies. But this death is not destruction, it is liberation. The ego screams, "Why have you forsaken me?" because it cannot comprehend its own dissolution. Yet beyond that cry, something deeper awakens. When everything you thought you were begins to fall apart, your beliefs, your roles, your defenses, what remains is consciousness itself. The crucifixion happens every time you let go of control, every time you allow an old identity to die so that a new awareness can be born. The resurrection, then, is not the supernatural return of a body. It is the rebirth of consciousness. It is the recognition that what you truly are cannot die. When the stone is rolled away, it's a symbol of the barriers of ignorance being lifted from the human mind. The empty tomb is the realization that the self was never confined to form. Jung called this the process of individuation, the moment when the individual becomes whole, integrating both light and shadow, human and divine. The resurrection happens not once in history, but every moment you awaken from illusion into presence. Christ's miracles can also be read as symbols of psychological healing. When he heals the blind, it means gaining inner sight, the ability to see reality as it is. When he calms the storm, it represents mastering the chaos of emotion through awareness. When he turns water into wine, it is the transformation of basic instinct into spiritual insight. These are not mere supernatural acts. They are metaphors for inner alchemy. The divine power he displays is the same potential hidden within each human being. As he says, "You will do greater things than these." The cross and the resurrection together form the map of inner transformation. To follow Christ psychologically means to descend into your own unconscious, to face your darkness without judgment, and to allow your false identities to die. It means realizing that salvation is not escape from the world, but awakening within it. You don't have to believe in theology to experience this truth. You only have to become conscious. That is why Christ says, "Take up your cross and follow me." It's not an invitation to suffer, but to transform, to carry your pain consciously until it becomes light. Every human being, in some way, walks this path. The betrayals we experience, the losses we endure, the moments of despair, these are our crucifixions. When you stop resisting them and begin to see them as initiations, resurrection becomes possible. The story of Christ is the eternal story of consciousness awakening through the human experience. It is your story, hidden beneath your daily struggles and silent realizations. But to truly understand Christ as a symbol for transformation, we must go beyond theology and enter the realm of inner experience. The cross, the resurrection, the teachings, all of them are psychological metaphors for what happens inside you when the ego dies and awareness awakens. The crucifixion represents the shattering of illusion, the painful dissolution of everything you thought you were. And the resurrection symbolizes what is reborn after that death, the self that exists beyond fear, pride, and control. This is why Christ's story is not just about one man who lived 2,000 years ago. It is about every human being who dares to awaken. To carry your cross means to face your own suffering consciously. To die before you die means to let go of the false self so the true self can live. When you understand this, you realize the gospel is not external history. It is the inner map of awakening. When Jesus says, "The kingdom of God is within you," he's not speaking poetically. He is pointing to a direct psychological reality. Heaven is not a location. It is a state of consciousness. The gates of heaven are not in the sky. They open in your perception the moment you drop resistance and see clearly. The miracle stories, too, carry profound symbolism. When Christ heals the blind, he's not only restoring physical sight, he's revealing inner vision. When he calms the storm, he's showing mastery over the chaotic forces of the mind. And when he raises the dead, he's demonstrating the awakening from spiritual sleep. Every miracle is a metaphor for transformation, from fear to trust, from ignorance to awareness, from separation to unity. Even the concept of sin takes on a new meaning in this light. Sin is not a moral stain, it's forgetfulness. It's the moment you fall asleep to your own divine nature. Redemption, then, is simply remembering who you are. That's why Christ's forgiveness is so radical. He doesn't forgive because you're guilty. He forgives because you were never separate to begin with. This understanding changes everything. It means you are not broken, not fallen, not unworthy. You are consciousness temporarily dreaming itself as a person. Your suffering is not punishment, it is initiation. Every hardship, every loss, every night of the soul is the invitation to awaken. And this is where psychology meets spirituality. Carl Jung, one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century, saw Christ as the archetype of the self, the symbol of wholeness. Jung believed that every person carries within them the same divine pattern, the journey from fragmentation to unity, from ego to awareness. The cross, to him, was not just a religious image but the tension of opposites that we must integrate within ourselves, light and dark, masculine and feminine, spirit and matter. To make the two one, as the Gospel of Thomas says, is the essence of individuation. This process is not comfortable. It demands that you face your shadow, the parts of yourself you've exiled or denied. But as Jung taught, what you resist not only persists, it rules you unconsciously. Transformation begins the moment you stop fighting your darkness and begin listening to it. Christ's descent into hell before resurrection mirrors this exact inner process, the willingness to face the depths before rising into light. And that is why the cross, in its deepest sense, is not a symbol of death. It's a symbol of integration. The vertical line represents the divine dimension, the eternal presence. The horizontal line represents the human, the temporal, the earthly. Their intersection is you, the point where heaven and earth meet in consciousness. When you awaken to that center, suffering transforms into meaning. But society has largely lost this understanding. Religion became dogma, and psychology became sterile. We divided what was never meant to be divided: spirit and mind, God and human. The result is the modern crisis of meaning. People chase pleasure, power, and distraction, yet feel emptier than ever. The soul has been exiled, and Christ's symbol has been misunderstood as something to worship rather than something to live. To reclaim that symbol is to reclaim your inner divinity. It's to understand that enlightenment is not escape, it's embodiment. Christ doesn't ask you to become him. He invites you to realize that you already share his essence. When he says, "I and the Father are one," it is not arrogance, it is awakening. It is the same realization the mystics across all traditions have expressed. The drop and the ocean are not two. So what does it mean for you here and now? It means that every time you choose presence over reaction, compassion over judgment, truth over illusion, you resurrect. Every moment you face fear with awareness, you participate in the eternal story of transformation. You don't need to wait for salvation. You are the continuation of that sacred process happening in real time, through your consciousness. The symbol of Christ lives not in churches, but in hearts that dare to awaken. It's in every act of forgiveness, every breath of awareness, every quiet surrender to what is. The divine doesn't demand worship, it seeks realization. And once you understand that, you see that the real miracle is not walking on water, but walking through life awake. So perhaps the real question is not whether Christ existed, but whether you will let the Christ within you come alive. Because the symbol only fulfills its purpose when it's embodied. When you become the presence that observes, forgives, and loves unconditionally, you are no longer seeking transformation. You are it. Now, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, what part of you is still nailed to the cross of illusion? What belief, what fear, what attachment are you ready to release so that something greater can rise within? If this message resonated with you, take a deep breath, reflect on what it awakened in you, and share your thoughts below. Which teaching from Christ's story feels most alive within you right now? Remember, awakening is not about reaching somewhere new. It's about remembering what has always been true. The kingdom is not coming. It's already here, waiting for you to see it. If this video inspired you, give it a like, share it with someone who needs light today, and subscribe for more reflections like this. Until next time, stay present, stay awake, and keep walking the path of inner transformation. Have you ever felt like something was missing from the Bible? Not in a religious way, but in a human one. As if behind the stories of prophets and parables, there was a hidden psychology, a guide to how the human mind really works. What if the most powerful teachings weren't erased because they were blasphemous, but because they were too revealing, too empowering? Because they taught people to look within instead of blindly following? That's what we're diving into today. The hidden psychological wisdom that never made it into the Bible, but which still lives quietly between its lines. Let's start with a simple truth. Stories shape the mind. Long before psychology had a name, spiritual texts were already decoding the subconscious. Every parable, every symbol was a mirror of human behavior. Take the story of Adam and Eve, not as a literal event, but as a psychological awakening. The garden wasn't just paradise, it was the unexamined mind. Eating from the tree of knowledge wasn't a sin, it was the birth of self-awareness. It was the moment humanity realized, I exist, I choose, I can see myself. The shame that followed wasn't punishment from God, but the shock of consciousness, the price of awakening from innocence into awareness. But the hidden teaching here isn't about guilt or temptation. It's about integration. The serpent wasn't evil. It represented the unconscious, the raw instinct that tempts us to evolve. Eve's choice wasn't rebellion. It was curiosity, the first spark of psychological growth. And yet, that story was rewritten to teach obedience instead of understanding. Why? Because an obedient mind is easier to control than an awakened one. Let's move to another story, the desert temptation of Christ. Most people see it as a moral test. But psychologically, it's something deeper. The desert represents emptiness, the inner silence where the ego confronts itself. When the voice of temptation whispers, "Turn these stones into bread," it's not about food. It's the mind saying, "Fill the void. Distract yourself. Escape discomfort." Every human being faces this same temptation, to avoid facing their own silence. Christ's refusal wasn't denial. It was mastery over impulse. It was the moment he proved that peace doesn't come from satisfying desire, but from transcending it. The second temptation, "Throw yourself from the temple, and the angels will save you," is the ego's hunger for validation. It's the voice that says, "Prove your worth. Be admired. Be seen." Christ's response, "You shall not test God." Psychologically, this means, don't test your own divinity by seeking approval. The true self doesn't need witnesses. It simply is. And the third temptation, "All the kingdoms of the world I will give you if you bow to me," is perhaps the clearest symbol of all. The ego promises control, power, and domination. But Christ's rejection of it isn't about denying ambition. It's about not confusing control with peace. The true kingdom isn't external. It's inner mastery. It's when your emotions, desires, and fears no longer rule you. That's sovereignty. That's the psychology of transcendence. Now, imagine if these teachings were emphasized more than obedience, sin, or fear. The world's entire understanding of spirituality might look completely different. The Bible might have been the greatest psychological manual ever written, but instead, much of its deeper meaning got lost in translation. Over centuries, mystical and introspective traditions were silenced. The Gnostics, the Desert Fathers, the Essenes, all of whom believed that salvation wasn't about worshiping something outside, but awakening something within. The Gnostic texts, many of which were removed from the canon, taught that the kingdom of God is within you wasn't poetry, it was literal. It meant that divine consciousness lives inside the psyche, waiting to be realized. But such ideas threatened institutional power. A person who sees God within needs no mediator, no authority, no permission to awaken. And that's dangerous to systems built on dependence. Let's look at another hidden psychological message: forgiveness. On the surface, it sounds moral, something good people do. But psychologically, forgiveness is liberation. It's the act of cutting the energetic cord that keeps you tied to the past. It's not about excusing others. It's about freeing yourself from emotional debt. When Christ said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do," it wasn't just compassion. It was a profound understanding of human blindness. People act from unconscious patterns. They hurt others because they're asleep. When you forgive, you're not saying what they did was right. You're saying, "I refuse to let your unconsciousness chain my soul." And what about the idea of heaven and hell? For centuries, it's been used as a tool of fear. But hidden beneath the dogma lies a psychological metaphor. Heaven and hell aren't places, they're states of mind. Hell is the mind consumed by resentment, envy, and self-pity. Heaven is consciousness free from attachment. The fire isn't literal. It's the burning of guilt, desire, and fear. And the eternal life Christ spoke of wasn't about living forever. It was about living fully, here and now, without being enslaved by the past or terrified of the future. Even the idea of sin takes on a different meaning through this lens. The Greek word for sin, hamartia, means to miss the mark. It's not about being evil. It's about being unconscious. Every act of suffering, cruelty, or ignorance is simply the psyche missing the mark of awareness. To repent doesn't mean to grovel. It means to realign, to return to consciousness. That's not religion. That's psychology at its highest form. The stories come alive if you start reading the Bible through this lens. You begin to see not dogma, but a map of the human mind. The fall, the exile, the crucifixion, the resurrection. These are not historical events, but inner experiences. The fall is losing touch with your essence. The exile is living disconnected from their heart. The crucifixion is the death of the ego. The resurrection is awakening to your true nature. Each story is a mirror, and each mirror shows a piece of you. There's a reason why these interpretations were forgotten, or perhaps hidden. Because if humanity truly understood that heaven and hell, sin and salvation, God and the devil, are all internal states of consciousness, the game of control would end. We would stop obeying out of fear and start growing out of understanding. And that's the most radical act of freedom there is. But let's go even deeper. What if the real message that was lost wasn't about morality or religion at all, but about consciousness itself? What if Christ wasn't trying to build a religion, but to reveal the structure of the human mind? Look closely at his teachings, and you'll see it everywhere. The kingdom of God is within you. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is single, your whole body will be full of light. These aren't mystical riddles. They're instructions for awareness. The single eye isn't literal, it's focus, presence, the unbroken attention that frees you from inner chaos. When the mind becomes one-pointed, when you stop being pulled by every thought and emotion, something extraordinary happens. You begin to see reality clearly. That's what enlightenment is. Not supernatural power, but psychological clarity. The mind loves distraction. It feeds on division, past and future, right and wrong, sinner and saint. But consciousness, the kind Christ pointed to, is whole. When he said, "Be still and know that I am God," it wasn't a call to worship. It was a call to silence, to experience the presence beneath all thought. The same stillness that modern psychology calls flow, mindfulness, or pure awareness. It's the space between thoughts, the moment before reaction, the pause where freedom lives. That's the doorway to peace. The lost teachings also spoke of energy, the subtle vibration that moves through all living things. The early mystics called it pneuma, the breath of life. Today, we'd call it consciousness or emotional energy. When you block it with guilt, shame, or fear, you suffer. When you let it flow through acceptance and understanding, you heal. Every miracle story, from healings to resurrections, can be read as metaphors for this energetic renewal, the mind returning to wholeness. When you forgive, you release energy. When you love without condition, you expand it. That's the true alchemy, turning pain into awareness, fear into compassion. Another hidden psychological truth lies in the idea of faith. Faith isn't belief, it's alignment. It's the psychological state where your thoughts, emotions, and actions move in the same direction. That's why Christ said, "If you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move mountains." Because when the mind stops doubting itself, when it unites thought and feeling, it becomes unstoppable. Mountains aren't geological, they're psychological. Every obstacle you face is a reflection of inner resistance. Faith isn't hoping something will happen. It's knowing that your inner world creates the outer one. Even prayer takes on a new meaning when you look through the psychological lens. When you pray, go into your inner room and shut the door. That's not about ritual, it's meditation. It's turning attention inward. The inner room is your consciousness, and shutting the door means withdrawing from the noise of the external world. True prayer isn't asking for something. It's entering alignment with what already is. It's tuning your mind to the frequency of peace so that outer life rearranges itself in resonance. And what about love, the center of Christ's message? It's not sentimental, or romantic. It's psychological wholeness. To love your enemy isn't to approve of them. It's to recognize that the same unconsciousness that blinds them once blinded you. Love dissolves separation. It's the realization that the self and the other are not two. Modern psychology would call it integration. The moment the shadow is no longer the enemy, but part of the whole. When you love the parts of yourself you used to reject, you stop projecting that rejection onto others. That's how peace begins, not in politics or religion, but in the human psyche. Many of these interpretations were present in early mystical Christianity before the Church institutionalized power. The Gospel of Thomas, discovered in 1945, holds one of the most striking lines. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. That's pure psychology. Suppression leads to suffering. Expression leads to healing. The very same principle that modern therapy is built upon was whispered 2,000 years ago and then hidden away. It makes you wonder, what else was erased, rewritten, or tamed to fit the narrative of control? Perhaps the reason Christ spoke in parables wasn't to confuse the simple, but to protect the wisdom from those who would weaponize it. Parables are encrypted psychology. You can't abuse them unless you understand them. And only those who are willing to look within can decode them. That's why he said, "Let those who have ears hear." It wasn't about sound. It was about awareness. But here's the most radical idea of all. Maybe salvation isn't something that happens after death. Maybe it's the psychological process of waking up, of remembering who you really are beneath conditioning, shame, and fear. Maybe eternal life is the state of consciousness that exists when you stop identifying with the temporary self and realize your awareness has no end. You were never separate from the divine, you just forgot. When seen this way, the Bible becomes not a rule book, but a mirror. It's not telling you what to believe, it's showing you what you are. Every story, every miracle, every teaching is an invitation to self-awareness. The kingdom of heaven isn't waiting for you somewhere in the clouds. It's waiting inside your perception, right now, hidden beneath the noise of your mind. So the question is, why did so few people see it? Maybe because truth is quiet and control is loud. Institutions thrive on noise, dogma, ritual, fear. But awakening happens in silence, in the privacy of your own awareness. That's where the real church is. Not in stone walls or holy books, but in the living mind of every human being who dares to look within. The hidden teachings of Christ were never truly lost. They live every time you choose presence over distraction, forgiveness over resentment, awareness over reaction. You don't need to find them, you need to remember them, because they were written not on paper, but on the human soul. What if everything you've ever sought, from peace to meaning to connection, was already inside you, waiting to be noticed? Do you think humanity is ready to rediscover that truth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this video made you think differently about the mind and spirituality, give it a like, share it with someone who'd appreciate it, and subscribe for more explorations into the psychology of awakening. Remember, the kingdom is not out there. It's within you, blooming quietly, waiting to be seen.
Have you ever seen an image, a dream, or a strange coincidence, and felt a shiver run down your spine without knowing why? That's not random. It's a symbol, and it's speaking directly to your subconscious mind. Most people underestimate the power of symbols. They think of them as simple images, screen icons, text emojis, or cultural signs. But that's only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more potent. Symbols are the unconscious language. They are how your deeper mind understands reality. They shape your beliefs, decisions, and emotions, often without you even realizing it. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, believed that symbols are the keys to unlocking the hidden parts of the psyche. He said that what we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate. And those unconscious forces, they are structured and moved by symbols, archetypal images that carry emotional weight and ancient meaning. But how exactly do symbols affect you? And what does modern neuroscience say about the subconscious mind that Jung intuited decades ago? Let's start at the beginning. When you dream, dreams are one of the purest expressions of the subconscious mind. They bypass your logical filters and communicate in a language that is emotional, metaphorical, and non-linear. That language is symbolic. You don't dream in spreadsheets or bullet points. You dream in images, falling, flying, chasing, drowning, facing someone you haven't seen in years. And every image, every pattern, is packed with meaning. Jung noticed that certain images appeared again and again in the dreams of people from different cultures, even if they had never met. He called these universal images archetypes. The wise old man, the shadow, the hero, the mother, the trickster. These aren't just characters, they're psychological forces within you. When you encounter a symbol of the hero, for example, your subconscious awakens your inner courage. When you see a shadowy figure, you confront your repressed fears. And this isn't just poetic theory. Neuroscience backs it up. Your brain doesn't just process information logically. It's constantly scanning for patterns, associations, and emotional relevance. The amygdala, the brain's emotional processor, lights up when you see a symbol that resonates with a core experience, especially one tied to survival, memory, or trauma. Let's say you see a burning house in a dream. Your conscious mind might brush it off, but your subconscious recognizes it as a symbol of inner crisis, destruction, or change. Even if you don't get it consciously, your brain has already triggered emotional responses, rewired neural pathways, and reinforced certain beliefs, simply because of the symbolic content. That's how powerful symbols are. They shape your brain. But there's more. Jung believed that when a symbol appears repeatedly in your dreams, thoughts, or life experiences, it's not a coincidence. It's what he called a meaningful synchronicity. It's as if the unconscious is sending you a message again and again, trying to push you toward integration, healing, or transformation. And the symbols aren't random. They're tailored to your unique inner world. If you grew up with religious imagery, your psyche might use angels or crosses to signal protection or morality. If you watched a lot of science fiction, your unconscious might communicate through space, aliens, or dystopian cities. The subconscious speaks your language, but in code. It's up to you to decipher it. This is where the inner work begins. Think about your recurring dreams, the images that haunt or comfort you, the symbols that show up in your art, writing, or imagination. Those aren't meaningless. They're maps, clues, messages from the parts of yourself that you've forgotten or pushed aside. The more you pay attention to them, the more integrated you become. And here's something even deeper. Symbols don't just reflect your inner world, they can transform it. Neuroscience shows that visualization and symbolic imagery activate many of the same neural pathways as real experiences. That means if you vividly imagine walking through a forest, facing your fears, or embracing your inner child, your brain starts building those emotional responses into your actual self. This is why symbolic rituals like journaling, meditation, or even drawing your dreams can lead to powerful psychological shifts. You're not just expressing something, you're rewiring your mind. Let's take an example. Suppose you constantly dream about being chased. This is one of the most common symbolic dreams. On the surface, it's just fear. But if you look deeper, what's chasing you? Is it a person, a shadow, a creature? Your subconscious is externalizing something within you, something unresolved, something you're avoiding. Now, imagine instead of running in the dream, you turn around and face it, or even speak to it. That shift in symbolic action changes everything. In Jungian terms, you begin the process of individuation, facing the shadow, reclaiming your power, and integrating the parts of yourself you've exiled. Symbolic confrontation leads to real psychological change, and this applies beyond dreams. Look at the symbols you surround yourself with, the art on your walls, the music you listen to, the shows you binge. Every one of those carries symbolic weight. They reflect aspects of your psyche. Do you gravitate toward chaos, order, rebellion, romance, darkness, or light? What you are drawn to symbolically reveals what you are seeking internally. This is the subtle language of the subconscious. In therapy, especially Jungian analysis, patients are often asked to draw, write, or meditate on symbolic imagery. Why? Because symbols bypass your mental defenses. You can lie to yourself in words, but it's harder to lie with a symbol. Your choice of image will always reveal more than you realize. And as neuroscience shows, these images don't just express your state, they influence it. Looking at a serene landscape, for example, reduces cortisol. Staring at abstract chaos can increase anxiety. Your brain responds to visual cues faster than to verbal ones. And those visual cues are encoded with meaning from your life, your culture, and your ancestors. It's a layered map. Jung also believed in the concept of the collective unconscious, a shared symbolic reservoir inherited by all humans. That's why certain symbols resonate across cultures and epochs. The serpent, the tree, the labyrinth, the phoenix. These aren't just stories, they're living energies, alive in your subconscious, shaping your journey. And when you work with symbols consciously, when you meditate on them, draw them, engage with them, you create a bridge between your surface self and your deeper mind. This bridge is what Jung called the path to wholeness. So many people live fragmented lives. They chase goals that aren't their own. They suppress feelings that are too painful to face, and slowly they disconnect from themselves. Symbols offer a way back. They are the trail markers through the forest of the unconscious, and they will always lead you home if you're willing to follow them. We are not rational creatures with occasional emotions. We are emotional, symbolic beings with the illusion of rationality. The sooner we accept this, the sooner we can begin to heal. The question is, are you paying attention? If your life feels off track, your dreams are anxious, or your creativity has dried up, it may not be a problem of logic or planning. It may be a symbolic crisis. You've lost touch with the images that once gave your life meaning. That's the wound. But it's also the invitation. Your subconscious is constantly speaking. Through dreams, through attraction, through fear, through the symbols you can't stop thinking about. Are you listening? Your healing may begin not with a decision, but with an image. A symbol that reminds you of who you really are. Let's go deeper. There is a reason symbols outlast civilizations. Languages die. Empires fall. But the symbol of the serpent, the eye, the cross, the spiral, they remain, not just as relics, but as living currents in the collective human psyche. They speak to something eternal in us, something pre-verbal, primal, and wise. Modern science is only beginning to understand what mystics and philosophers have intuited for centuries, that your subconscious mind does not operate through linear language or cold logic. It operates through imagery, emotion, rhythm, and story. And symbols are the building blocks of those stories. Let's pause here. Think about a symbol that has haunted or inspired you since childhood. Maybe it's a place, a creature, a color, an object. You might not even know why it feels powerful, but it does. That feeling is not random. Your brain has coded that image with deep associations, possibly linked to early memory, trauma, awe, or longing. And when you return to that symbol later in life, especially during moments of crisis, it acts like a compass. It draws you back towards something unresolved. That is the subconscious at work, not sabotaging you, but inviting you to integrate. Integration is the key. Carl Jung believed that the goal of life is not to be perfect, but to be whole. Wholeness requires facing your contradictions, embracing your fears, and reclaiming the forgotten parts of yourself. Symbols are the tools that help you navigate that journey, like ancient maps drawn in your dreams. And here's where it gets fascinating. Your brain physically changes when you engage with meaningful symbols. Through neuroplasticity, every time you visualize a symbolic image, reflect on it deeply, or even engage with it in meditation or ritual, you activate neural networks tied to memory, emotion, and self-perception. These networks begin to strengthen, adapt, and rewire. So when you repeatedly expose yourself to empowering, healing, or integrating symbols, you are reconstructing your internal world. Your mind reshapes its reality around the images you give attention to. This is why art heals, why mythology still moves us, why ancient stories carry timeless relevance. Because they don't just inform you, they transform you. Let's go even deeper. The symbols that disturb you are often more revealing than the ones that comfort you. If a particular image causes discomfort, avoidance, or even fear, it's usually tied to a shadow aspect of your psyche. Something repressed, denied, or unacknowledged. Jung referred to this as the shadow, the part of ourselves that holds what we've rejected or hidden. And the only way to truly grow is to face it. Imagine seeing a recurring symbol in your life, a dark staircase, a closed door, a masked figure. These aren't just random images. They're invitations. Invitations to descend, to open, to unmask. When you resist them, they become louder, more chaotic. But when you turn toward them, something miraculous happens. Transformation. The symbol becomes a portal, not just to knowledge, but to power. This is how you access the deeper reserves of strength within you, not by suppressing the symbol, but by engaging with it, drawing it, meditating on it, asking what it means, what it wants, and listening. Neuroscience confirms that this act of conscious attention rewires your relationship with fear, memory, and identity. By reframing the symbolic content in your life, you reframe your self-image. So what symbols are running your life in the background? Most people are ruled by unconscious imagery that they never question. The broken mirror of shame, the cage of unworthiness, the storm of anxiety. These are not just emotions, they're symbolic structures embedded in the subconscious. And they influence your decisions, your relationships, even your posture and voice. But what if you changed the image? What if you replaced the cage with a key, the storm with a sunrise, the broken mirror with a window? This isn't denial, it's symbolic reorientation. And it works. Trauma therapists now use visualization techniques that mirror symbolic transformation. Guided imagery, safe places, inner child work. All of these tap into the subconscious using symbolic language because they bypass the rational mind and speak directly to the emotional brain. Symbolic healing is real healing. Jung also spoke of the self, a deeper center of the psyche that transcends the ego. It's the wholeness behind your fragmented personality. And the self often appears in dreams as a symbol. A mandala, a wise figure, a circle, a divine child. When you begin encountering these images in your inner world, it's not fantasy. It's your unconscious revealing the blueprint of your integration. It's showing you that something in you is trying to unify. But this process requires courage, because before the light, there's darkness. Before the integration, there was fragmentation. And that's where many people turn away. They fear the symbols that reveal their brokenness, not realizing that those very images carry the medicine. You don't need to fix yourself. You need to face yourself. That's what symbols offer. A mirror, not of how the world sees you, but of how your soul sees you. And that mirror can be terrifying. But it can also be liberating. The truth is, your mind is a myth-making machine. It's constantly creating narratives about who you are, what you deserve, and where you're going. Those narratives are built on symbols, some inherited, some personal. The key is to become aware of the myth you're living. Are you the victim, the hero, the orphan, the seeker, the outcast? These are not just roles, they're symbolic containers for identity. And if you live unconsciously inside the wrong symbol, you'll suffer. But if you choose consciously, you'll transform. You are the storyteller. And the story is written in symbols. That's why so many people feel stuck. They are living inside a symbol that no longer fits. A cage that once protected them, but now limits them. And until they see it as a symbol, not reality, they can't escape. So here's the invitation. Examine the symbols that shape your inner world. What do you see in your dreams? What images do you fear? What symbols give you hope? What stories are you repeating? And who gave them to you? You can choose new symbols, not to erase the past, but to reframe it. Not to deny your pain, but to give it meaning. This is the essence of transformation. When you see your suffering not as punishment, but as passage. When the broken sword becomes a relic of strength. When the scar becomes a mark of wisdom. When the fall becomes the initiation. And the best part, you don't need to understand it all intellectually. Your subconscious already knows. It has always been known. It's been speaking to you since the moment you were born, in dreams, in instincts, in patterns, in longings. The symbols are already there. All you have to do is look. So now I ask you, what is one symbol that keeps showing up in your life through dreams, signs, or even artwork? And what might it be trying to tell you? Share it in the comments. I read everything. And your symbol might help someone else understand their own journey too. You are more than your thoughts. You are more than your habits. You are more than your fears. You are a symbolic being, rich, deep, ancient. And the more you reconnect with that inner language, the more whole you become. The symbol is not the end. It is the door, so open it. If this video spoke to something deep in you, don't forget to like it, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your mind is waiting. Your symbols are waiting. Your transformation has already begun.
Have you ever wondered why some people can instantly earn your trust while others make you feel uneasy, even without saying a word? Trust is invisible, yet it shapes every decision, every relationship, and every sense of safety we carry. It can take years to build and seconds to destroy. Understanding the psychology of trust is like holding a map to the human heart and mind, a compass that guides you through the unseen territory of motives, fears, and hidden expectations. This is not just about theory. This is about how your brain, your emotions, and your experiences work together to decide who you let into your world and who you keep at arm's length. Trust begins before words. Long before we consciously decide whether someone is safe, our nervous system is scanning for subtle cues. A micro-expression, a tone of voice, a flicker of the eyes, all of it tells a story. Neuroscience shows that the brain's amygdala, which processes threat, and the prefrontal cortex, which weighs risk, fire simultaneously when you meet someone new. In milliseconds, you're running calculations. Is this person aligned with me? Are they likely to harm or help me? This ancient mechanism evolved to keep us alive. Yet in modern life, it determines who you hire, who you confide in, and even who you love. But trust is not just a reflex. It's also a story you tell yourself. From childhood, your earliest caregivers teach you whether the world is safe or unpredictable. Psychologists call this attachment. If your needs were met with consistency, you tend to believe people will show up for you. If they were met with chaos or neglect, you may struggle to believe promises or find yourself testing others again and again. This isn't weakness, it's an adaptation. Your nervous system is trying to protect you from disappointment. Recognizing this pattern in yourself is the first step toward changing it. At its core, trust is built on two pillars: competence and integrity. Competence answers the question, can you do what you say you'll do? Integrity answers the question, will you do it even when it costs you something? Without competence, promises feel empty. Without integrity, even skillful people feel dangerous. When both are present, your mind relaxes. You don't have to monitor, second-guess, or brace for betrayal. Think of the people in your life you trust the most. They probably score high on both pillars, even if you've never articulated it that way. There's also a third, often overlooked pillar: benevolence. This is the felt sense that someone has your best interests at heart. They might be competent and honest, but still indifferent to your well-being. In that case, you sense a transactional energy, and true trust never takes root. Benevolence is communicated in small, consistent acts: remembering your concerns, offering help without strings attached, showing up when it's inconvenient. When competence, integrity, and benevolence align, trust becomes not just an expectation but a lived experience. Yet trust is fragile because our brains are wired for negativity bias. We remember betrayals more vividly than loyalty. One broken promise can outweigh 10 kept ones. This bias kept our ancestors alive, but in modern relationships, it can create cycles of suspicion and withdrawal. To counteract this, you must consciously update your mental trust ledger. Notice not only when someone fails you, but also when they come through. Train your mind to weigh patterns, not isolated incidents. Social psychologists have found that trust operates on a sliding scale rather than a binary. You don't simply trust or distrust someone. You extend different levels of trust depending on context. You might trust a coworker to deliver a report, but not to keep a personal secret. You might trust a friend with your emotions, but not with your finances. Understanding these gradients helps you set realistic boundaries instead of expecting all-or-nothing loyalty. The paradox of trust is that it requires vulnerability. You cannot verify trust without risking something: your time, your secrets, your reputation, your heart. This risk activates the same fear circuits as physical danger, which is why betrayal can feel like an actual wound. But vulnerability is also what deepens connection. When you take a chance on someone and they honor it, your bond strengthens. Each kept promise rewires your brain, telling you it's safe to lean in. Over time, this creates a positive feedback loop. Trust leads to openness, which leads to more trust. Consider how this plays out in leadership. A manager who hoards information breeds suspicion, but one who shares context openly signals respect. Employees reciprocate with loyalty and discretionary effort. In families, parents who admit mistakes model accountability, teaching children that trust is not about perfection but about repair. In friendships, showing up consistently, even for small things, builds a reservoir of goodwill that carries you through inevitable conflicts. Modern society complicates trust because so many interactions are mediated by screens. Online, you can curate an image, hide flaws, or fabricate credentials. Our ancient trust detectors, body language, tone, microexpressions, are muted. As a result, we rely more heavily on reputations, reviews, and social proof. This is why influencers and brands fight so hard for authenticity. Once their trust capital is depleted, it's almost impossible to recover. Yet despite all these complexities, humans are wired to seek connection. We want to trust. We are drawn to signals of reliability like warmth, congruence between words and actions, and shared values. Even small rituals, greetings, eye contact, timely responses, become microdeposits in the emotional bank account of trust. Over time, these deposits compound into a sense of safety and mutual respect that feels almost invisible but is profoundly powerful. When you understand the psychology of trust, you start to see it everywhere, in politics, marketing, dating, and even in your relationship with yourself. Self-trust, perhaps the most fundamental form, grows when your actions align with your values. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, no matter how small, you signal to your own mind, I am someone I can rely on. This creates internal stability, which in turn makes you more discerning and generous in extending trust to others. If self-trust is the foundation, repairing it is the construction project of your life. Many people betray themselves daily through broken commitments, skipped goals, ignored boundaries, silenced truths. Over time, this erodes not only confidence, but also the ability to trust others. Your mind thinks, if I can't even rely on myself, how can I rely on anyone else? Rebuilding starts with micro-promises. Do one small thing you said you'd do, then another. Each follow-through plants a seed of credibility in your own psyche. That credibility becomes the lens through which you evaluate everyone else. Trust also has a collective dimension. Communities, companies, and even nations thrive or collapse based on shared trust. Economists call this social capital, the invisible glue of cooperation. In high-trust societies, people obey rules even when no one is watching. Transactions are faster, relationships smoother, and innovation more daring. In low-trust societies, everything slows down under the weight of suspicion, bureaucracy, and enforcement. You can see this dynamic in microcosm at work or in friendships. The more you must double-check, monitor, or protect yourself, the less energy remains for creativity or intimacy. This is why betrayal cuts so deep. It's not just about one act. It's about the shattering of an invisible infrastructure you relied on. Psychologists liken it to a trust injury, which requires a healing process much like a physical wound. The first stage is shock. Your nervous system's alarm bells ring. Then comes grief, anger, bargaining. Finally, if both parties are willing, there's a repair. Repair doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It means rebuilding with transparency, accountability, and consistent action over time. Without these elements, forgiveness remains intellectual, but trust never fully returns. Interestingly, trust can also be manipulated. Con artists and abusers exploit the same psychological cues that normally signal safety, mirroring your body language, feigning vulnerability, showering you with attention. This is called grooming. Knowing this doesn't mean you must become cynical. It means you must combine an open heart with a discerning eye. Trust but verify. Ask yourself, do their actions align with their words over time? Do they respect your boundaries? Are they transparent when the stakes are high? Healthy skepticism is not paranoia, it's wisdom. Another overlooked dimension is cultural. What reads as trustworthy in one culture may signal deceit in another. Direct eye contact is valued in some countries, seen as aggressive in others. Modesty may be read as humility in one context, incompetence in another. When you interact across cultures, widen your lens. Look for patterns rather than single cues. Build bridges with curiosity instead of quick judgments. Then there's the question of digital trust. Algorithms decide what you see, who you meet, and which voices get amplified. Data breaches, fake reviews, and deep fakes erode confidence in systems we once took for granted. Developing digital literacy is part of modern trust psychology, learning to cross-check sources, question motives, and protect your privacy. Ironically, as technology advances, we crave authentic human signals more than ever. So how can you actively cultivate trust in your life? Start by embodying the qualities you seek. Show competence by following through. Show integrity by aligning words and actions, even when inconvenient. Show benevolence by considering the impact of your choices on others. Communicate transparently, especially when things go wrong. Admit mistakes promptly and outline your plan to fix them. These behaviors not only build your reputation, but also model what healthy trust looks like. People mirror what they experience. Next, set clear boundaries. Many think boundaries destroy trust. The opposite is true. Boundaries define the space in which trust can grow without resentment. When people know your limits, they feel safer, not stifled. You can give a full yes because you're not saying yes out of obligation or fear. This clarity makes your commitments meaningful and your relationships more resilient. Also, practice what psychologists call trust calibration. Instead of giving full trust immediately or withholding it entirely, extend it gradually and observe. Start with small disclosures or tasks. If the person handles them well, increase your level of openness. If they don't, adjust accordingly. This approach protects you while giving others a fair chance to earn deeper trust. Self-awareness is your strongest tool. Notice your own triggers. Do you overtrust because you fear conflict? Do you undertrust because of old wounds? Journaling, therapy, or mindful reflection can reveal these patterns. Once you see them, you can choose rather than react. Trust then becomes an intentional act, not an unconscious reflex. Ultimately, the psychology of trust is about connection, not control. You cannot eliminate all risk from human relationships, but you can learn to navigate that risk with intelligence, courage, and compassion. When you approach trust as a living process rather than a fixed trait, you open the door to deeper, richer bonds. You stop seeing betrayal as proof that all people are dangerous and start seeing it as a signal to refine your discernment. Imagine a world where you trust wisely, where your yes means yes and your no means no, where your boundaries are clear but your heart remains open. Such a life feels lighter, freer. Energy once spent on suspicion can be redirected to growth, creativity, and joy. This is not naive, it's empowered. And remember, trust is contagious. When you embody trustworthiness, you permit others to do the same. Your relationships become laboratories for healing, not battlegrounds for power. Over time, this ripples outward. Families, teams, communities become safer spaces. The invisible network of trust grows stronger because of the choices you make today. As you reflect on your own life, where do you place your trust? In whom? In what? And just as importantly, how do you cultivate it within yourself? Share your experiences and insights in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if this exploration of the psychology of trust has sparked new thoughts or challenged old patterns, remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel for deeper insights into the hidden forces shaping our inner and outer worlds.
Most people think individuation means becoming your best self, or that it's about becoming independent, empowered, or fully developed. But what if I told you that Carl Jung's idea of individuation has little to do with self-improvement in the way we imagine it? That it's not about perfection, but about confrontation. Not about becoming more, but about becoming whole. Not more light, but more shadow. You see, Individuation isn't the final glow-up of your personality. It's the painful process of dying to who you think you are. Jung didn't want you to be better. He wanted you to be more real. Stop identifying with the masks you wear, the roles you play, the names you've been called. The real journey of individuation begins where your ego starts to break down, where the version of yourself you've polished for society starts to crack, and something raw begins to emerge. That rawness, uncomfortable, alien, maybe even terrifying is the beginning of something authentic. You don't find yourself by adding new layers. You find yourself by stripping away the ones you never chose. The goal of individuation isn't becoming someone different. It's remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And Jung warned us, this process isn't pretty. It's not glamorous. It's not viral. It's an inner war. Between what's conscious and what's buried. Between the persona and the shadow. Between the lie we live and the truth we fear. So let's walk through this, slowly, deeply, honestly. Because if you've ever felt the quiet ache that your life isn't quite your own, this is for you. If you've ever stared in the mirror and thought, I don't know who I am anymore, this is your path. If you've sensed a deeper, older part of yourself calling from the inside, that's the self. And individuation is how you answer. Let's start with what individuation is not. It's not success. It's not healing all your wounds. It's not achieving enlightenment. Individuation doesn't promise happiness. It demands wholeness. And wholeness includes pain, grief, and contradiction. To individuate is to allow all parts of you to exist, even the parts you were told to hide. Jung believed that we are born whole. But as we grow, we learn to disown certain parts of ourselves to be accepted. The angry part, the vulnerable part, the rebellious part. All of it gets pushed into the unconscious, into what Jung called the shadow. And the more we repress, the more we fragment. Eventually, we mistake the fragment, the mask, the ego for the whole. And that's the tragedy. Individuation is the reversal of that process. It's going back to gather what we lost. Not to become who we should be, but to integrate who we are. To hold our light and our darkness in the same breath. This is why Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. It's not a metaphor, it's a roadmap. So why is this so hard? Because we're not trained to face ourselves. We're trained to perform, to adapt, to succeed, to be liked. Most of us are trapped in the persona, the social mask we wear to function. And we believe that's all we are. But behind that mask lives something deeper, the true self. And the self is wild, paradoxical, divine. It doesn't care about fitting in. It cares about becoming whole. The first step of individuation is noticing that the life you're living doesn't match the life your soul longs for. You feel off, disconnected, anxious, and numb. Maybe you achieve everything you wanted and still feel empty. That's the call to go inward, to descend. This descent often looks like depression, confusion, and chaos. Jung called it the night sea journey. It's the time when everything familiar dissolves. You start to question everything. Your beliefs, your identity, your relationships, your purpose. It's not a breakdown, it's a breakthrough, but it doesn't feel like it at first. Individuation isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. You revisit your pain from new angles. You meet old wounds in new forms. You discover forgotten parts of yourself, not just trauma, but brilliance too. Your inner child, your inner sage, your inner rebel, all of them are waiting to be reclaimed. This isn't therapy talk. This is an archetypal truth. You are a house with many rooms, but you've only been living in the foyer. Individuation invites you to explore the whole house, including the basement. Especially the basement. That's where the shadow lives. That's where your unlived life waits. And here's the paradox. Your shadow isn't evil. It's just unseen. Maybe it's your assertiveness. Maybe it's your creativity. Maybe it's your rage. Maybe it's your joy. The things you repress don't die, they just go underground. And until you face them, they will control you from the dark. That's why Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Individuation is a rebellion against unconscious fate. It's the act of becoming a conscious participant in your myth. You stop living by default and start living by design, not someone else's, but your own. And to do that, you need courage. Not the courage to fight the world, but to face yourself. To look into the mirror without turning away. That mirror might show you things you'd rather not see. Your jealousy, your fear, your need for approval, your lies. But it will also show you your soul, your gifts, your power, your calling. All the things you buried to survive. You see, Jung's idea wasn't just psychological, it was spiritual. He believed that individuation was the soul's journey back to itself. That beneath the ego, beneath the complexes, there is a sacred center, what he called the self, and it's waiting for you to remember. But the self doesn't shout. It whispers. It appears in dreams, symbols, and synchronicities. It speaks in gut feelings and strange longings. And most of us are too distracted to listen. That's why individuation requires solitude, reflection, silence. You have to clear the noise to hear the voice within, and once you hear it, your life starts to shift, not always in comfortable ways. Relationships may fall apart. Careers may feel empty. You might lose friends, you might lose status, but what you gain is truth, alignment, soul integrity. You stop pretending. You start becoming. And that's the sacred danger of individuation. It will cost you everything that's not real. But what it gives you in return is yourself. Jung warned us, individuation is not for the faint of heart. It demands that you stand at the edge of what you know and willingly step into what you don't. Not once, but over and over. You'll lose your footing, you'll doubt your mind, but this is not regression. This is the sacred undoing that precedes rebirth. In mythological terms, this is the hero's descent into the underworld. Like Orpheus descending to find Eurydice. Like Inanna stripped of her garments. Like Christ in the tomb. These stories aren't dead. They live inside you. You are the one walking through darkness, searching for something precious you've lost, your soul. But no one can walk it for you. Individuation is profoundly personal. There are no maps, only archetypes, symbols, dreams, intuitions. The world won't validate this path. It's invisible on the outside, but internally, it's seismic. Your values change, your instincts change. Your definitions of success and love and purpose, all of them start to shift. You no longer crave admiration. You crave authenticity. You no longer want to be seen. You want to be known. You no longer seek comfort. You seek truth, even when it burns. This is how you know you're individuating. You stop chasing the life that looks good and start creating the life that feels right. You'll begin to reconcile opposites within you. Strength and softness. Control and surrender. Masculine and feminine. The mind and the body. Logic and intuition. The deeper you go, the more you realize. These were never enemies. They were fragments of the same whole, split by trauma, reunited by truth. You realize the parts of you that used to scare you now guide you. Your anxiety becomes a compass. Your anger becomes a boundary. Your grief becomes a portal. Even your flaws become teachers. You don't eliminate the dark, you integrate it. And suddenly, you're no longer controlled by it. That's the hidden meaning of Jung's work. Not to remove darkness, but to dialogue with it. Not to become good, but to become whole. And when you're whole, you're no longer fragmented by your fears. You move from reaction to intention. You don't suppress the chaos, you dance with it. And then, something incredible happens. The ego, instead of resisting the self, begins to serve it. Your identity becomes a tool, not a prison. You live not from should, but from soul. Your outer life begins to reflect your inner truth. It may not be glamorous. It may not make sense to others. But to you, it feels like home. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that privilege is earned, not through conformity, but through confrontation. Not through fixing yourself, but by facing yourself. You stop asking, "What do others expect of me?" And start asking, "What does my soul demand of me?" And that shift, that sacred rebellion, is where your real life begins. And here's the part most people don't understand. Individuation is never finished. It's not a destination you arrive at and claim victory. It's a living, breathing relationship with your unconscious. A lifetime of integration. A spiral that goes deeper every year. The self is not a mountain peak. It's a deepening presence. You may individuate through parenthood, through grief, through solitude, through creation, through love, through heartbreak, through illness. Life becomes the canvas of your psyche, and every experience becomes an invitation to wholeness. Even the things you think you regret. They become part of the pattern, the affairs, the failures, the betrayals, the breakdowns. They all belong. Jung would say, only the paradox comes anywhere near to comprehending the fullness of life. And individuation is the art of holding paradox. You are both human and divine, both wounded and wise, both shadow and light. And when you stop trying to be one or the other, when you embrace both, that's when you begin to truly live. So many people live half-lives. Half known, half felt, half true. They fear the unknown so much, they choose familiarity over freedom. But you're being called to more. No more achievements, not more validation, but more soul, more presence, more wholeness. Maybe that's why you're here. Not just watching this, but here on Earth. To remember, to reunite, to become who you already are. That's what individuation is. Not becoming something new, but becoming fully you. It's easy to chase knowledge. It's harder to chase meaning. Individuation is meaning. It's not always pretty, but it's always profound. It's the invisible journey that shapes everything visible. The silent revolution within that eventually transforms the world without. And here's the irony. The more you individuate, the more connected you feel. To others, to the universe, to existence itself. Because wholeness isn't isolation, it's participation. The more you know yourself, the more deeply you can love. The more you heal your inner split, the more peace you bring into the world. So if you're on this path, if you're walking through the darkness, questioning everything, feeling alone, you're not lost. You're being reassembled. Slowly. Sacredly, the pieces are coming together. The self is remembering itself through you. Let that land for a moment. Now I want to hear from you. What part of you are you currently integrating? What truth have you been avoiding but feel ready to face? Share it in the comments. Your words might help someone else feel less alone on their journey. And if this message spoke to something deep in you, something you can't fully explain, but can deeply feel, then this channel is for you. Like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so we can keep exploring the inner world together. Because the real revolution isn't out there, it's in here. And the deeper you go, the freer you become.
A 3-year-old boy in Oklahoma walks up to his mother and says, "I used to be tall, and my name was Robert. I had a different family. I died in a fire." The mother laughs it off. Kids say weird things, right? But then he starts describing the layout of a house he's never been to, names people he's never met, and points to a city on a map 2,000 miles away where he claims he lived before. When researchers finally investigate, they find records of a man named Robert who died in a house fire in that exact city, in a house matching the boy's description, surrounded by family members whose names the child somehow knew. This isn't science fiction. This is documented research that's been buried in academic journals for decades, while mainstream psychology pretends it doesn't exist. What if I told you there are over 2,000 documented cases like this? What if the evidence for reincarnation isn't some mystical nonsense, but hard data that's been systematically ignored because it doesn't fit the materialist worldview that dominates modern science? Today, we're diving into the research that makes skeptics uncomfortable, the cases that can't be explained away, and the question that psychology refuses to ask. What happens when the evidence contradicts everything we've been taught about consciousness, memory, and the nature of human existence? Let's start with the elephant in the room. When most people hear reincarnation, they think of hippies, crystal shops, and past life regression scams. They think of people claiming they were Cleopatra or Napoleon in a previous life. And yeah, there's plenty of nonsense out there. But what we're talking about today isn't that. We're talking about rigorous scientific investigation conducted by researchers at major universities, published in peer-reviewed journals, involving cases with documented evidence, verified facts, and no financial incentive to lie. We're talking about children, usually between the ages of 2 and 7, who spontaneously start talking about previous lives with details so specific and accurate that they can only be explained in a few ways. Either these kids are accessing information they couldn't possibly know through normal means, or we need to completely rethink how memory and consciousness work. The pioneer of this research was a psychiatrist named Ian Stevenson. He spent over 40 years at the University of Virginia investigating cases of children who claimed to remember previous lives. This wasn't some fringe researcher working in his basement. Stevenson was the chair of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Virginia School of Medicine. He published over 300 papers and 14 books documenting his findings. His methodology was meticulous. When he heard about a case, he would interview the child before any attempts were made to verify the claims. He would document everything the child said, the names, the places, the details about their supposed previous life. Then he would investigate whether such a person actually existed, whether the details matched up, and whether there was any way the child could have learned this information through normal channels. What he found was staggering. In case after case, children were providing accurate information about deceased individuals they had never met, places they had never been, and events they couldn't possibly know about. We're not talking about vague statements that could apply to anyone. These kids were naming specific villages, describing the interiors of houses, identifying family members from photographs, and recounting how they died, often with emotional intensity that seemed way beyond their years. In one case from Lebanon, a boy named Imad Elawar started talking about a previous life when he was barely old enough to speak. He mentioned a man named Mahmoud, a woman named Jamila, and spoke about a house in a village called Kribi, which was 25 miles away from where Imad lived. His family had no connection to that village. When Stevenson investigated, he found that a man named Ibrahim Bahamzi had died in Kribi, and every detail Imad provided matched Ibrahim's life. The house description was accurate, the family members' names were correct, even obscure details about Ibrahim's injuries and how he died lined up perfectly with what Imad had been saying. Now here's where it gets interesting. These children often have phobias related to how their previous personality died. A child who claims to have drowned in a previous life develops an intense fear of water that can't be explained by anything in their current life. A child who says they died in a car accident becomes terrified of vehicles. These aren't rational fears. They're visceral, panic-inducing responses that seem completely disproportionate to a young child's limited life experience. Even more bizarre, some of these children have birthmarks or birth defects that correspond to wounds their previous personalities supposedly had. Stevenson documented over 200 cases where children had unusual birthmarks in locations matching fatal wounds of the deceased person they claimed to be. In some cases, he obtained autopsy reports and medical records showing the exact correspondence between the birthmark and the wound. One case involved a boy in Turkey who was born with a severely underdeveloped right ear and right-sided facial defects. He claimed to remember being a man who was shot on the right side of his head. When Stevenson investigated, he found that a man matching the description had indeed been shot in that exact location, and the hospital records confirmed the trajectory of the bullet matched the boy's birth defects. The odds of this being a coincidence? Astronomically low. But here's what mainstream psychology does with this data. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. These cases are ignored, dismissed, or explained away with increasingly implausible alternative theories. The standard response is that it's all either fraud, coincidence, or cryptomnesia, which is a fancy term for hidden memory. The idea is that the child somehow encountered information about the deceased person, forgot they learned it, but retained it subconsciously and later reproduced it, thinking it was a past life memory. But this explanation falls apart under scrutiny. In many cases, Stevenson and his colleagues verified that there was no possible way for the child to have accessed the information. They lived in different regions, spoke different languages, had no family connections, no shared social networks, nothing. The villages were sometimes so remote that even the deceased person's family members had never heard of the child's hometown. Plus, we're talking about children as young as 2 years old providing dozens of accurate details about complex family relationships and historical events. If cryptomnesia could do that, we'd be using it to teach kids calculus. Then there's the fraud explanation. Sure, maybe some parents are making this up for attention or money. But Stevenson specifically selected cases where there was no financial incentive. Many of these families were poor, and some were even embarrassed by their child's claims because it went against their religious beliefs. In cultures where reincarnation isn't part of the dominant worldview, having a child claim to be someone else is often seen as shameful or disturbing, not something to exploit. And even if we assume some cases are fraudulent, what about the birthmark correspondence? Are we supposed to believe that parents are deliberately injuring their children in specific locations to match obscure historical deaths? That's not just unlikely, that's insane. The coincidence explanation is equally weak. Yes, sometimes random details can line up, but we're not talking about 1 or 2 vague matches. We're talking about 20, 30, sometimes 50 specific, verifiable facts all pointing to the same deceased individual. The statistical probability of that happening by chance is virtually zero. Imagine if I told you I had never met your grandmother, never been to her house, never seen photos of her, but I could describe the wallpaper in her kitchen, the name of her neighbor's dog, the exact way she injured her leg in 1974, and the song she was humming when she died. At what point do you stop calling it a coincidence and start asking how this is possible? This is where modern psychology reveals its blind spot. The field is built on a materialist assumption that consciousness is purely a product of brain activity. If the brain creates consciousness, then consciousness dies when the brain dies. End of story. Reincarnation can't exist because it violates this fundamental assumption. But what if the assumption is wrong? What if consciousness isn't produced by the brain, but rather interacts with it? This isn't mystical speculation. It's a legitimate scientific question that deserves investigation. Yet psychology has essentially decided in advance that certain phenomena can't exist, and therefore don't merit serious study. It's like a 19th century scientist refusing to look through Galileo's telescope because everyone knows the Earth is the center of the universe. The research didn't stop with Stevenson. After he died in 2007, his work was continued by Dr. Jim Tucker, also at the University of Virginia. Tucker has investigated hundreds of additional cases and has published extensively on the subject. He's also taken a more analytical approach, looking for patterns in the data. What he's found is that most cases involve children who claim to have died violent or unexpected deaths. The median age of death of the previous personality is around 28 years old, which is much younger than the normal life expectancy. It's as if sudden, traumatic deaths somehow create stronger imprints that carry over to the next life. Tucker has also found that the stronger the child's memories, the more likely they are to have phobias or behavioral traits matching the previous personality. Children who vividly remember being soldiers often engage in aggressive play or show unusual knowledge of weapons. Children who remember being the opposite gender sometimes insist on wearing clothes or engaging in activities typical of their remembered gender, despite being raised otherwise. Now let's address the biggest objection. If reincarnation is real, why don't more people remember past lives? This is actually a question the research addresses. The vast majority of these cases involve children under the age of 7. As they get older, the memories fade. By the time they're 10 or 12, most have completely forgotten their past life claims. This suggests that whatever mechanism allows these memories to persist, it's somehow tied to early childhood development. Maybe it's because young children's brains are still forming, more plastic, more open to unusual experiences. Or maybe it's because they haven't yet been fully conditioned by society to dismiss such memories as impossible. Think about how many kids have imaginary friends or claim to see things adults can't see. We usually chalk it up to overactive imagination, but what if some of these experiences are something else? There's also the cultural factor. Most of the documented cases come from cultures where reincarnation is an accepted belief. In India, Thailand, Burma, and Lebanon, these societies don't automatically dismiss a child's claims as fantasy. Parents take them seriously, which allows researchers to investigate before the memories fade. In Western cultures, if a kid starts talking about a previous life, they're usually told to stop making things up, or worse, they're taken to a therapist to fix their delusion. The memories get suppressed, and potential cases are lost before they can be documented. This doesn't mean reincarnation only happens in certain cultures. It means it only gets investigated in certain cultures. If you're looking for a phenomenon only in places where it's taken seriously, of course, you're going to find it there and nowhere else. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Some cases have been documented in Western countries, and they're just as compelling. There's a famous case of a boy named James Leininger from Louisiana. Starting at age 2, James began having intense nightmares about being in a plane crash. He would scream night after night, thrashing around, yelling that his plane was on fire and he couldn't get out. His parents were baffled. He hadn't watched war movies. He had no exposure to anything that would trigger this. But then James started talking about specifics. He said his plane was a Corsair, which is a World War II fighter aircraft. He said he flew off a ship called the Natoma. He said he was shot down by the Japanese at Iwo Jima. He even named a fellow pilot Jack Larson. James's father, who was originally a skeptic, started investigating. He discovered that the USS Natoma Bay was a real escort carrier that fought at Iwo Jima. He found that a pilot named James Houston had been killed when his plane was shot down during that battle. And yes, there was a Jack Larson who served on the same ship and survived the war. When James was shown a photograph of World War II pilots from the Natoma Bay, without being told who anyone was, he pointed to one man and said, "That's Jack Larson." He was right. Now the skeptics tried to explain this away by suggesting that James must have watched a documentary or overheard his parents talking about World War II. But his parents documented everything from the beginning. They kept journals, they recorded his statements before investigating them, and they verified that he had no access to this information. A 2-year-old in Louisiana in the year 2000 did not have encyclopedic knowledge of obscure World War II aircraft carrier operations. Yet James did. He knew details that even military historians had to dig through archives to confirm. Eventually, James met with James Houston's sister, who was still alive. She showed him family photos. James recognized the people in them, knew their names, and spoke about events from Houston's childhood that only family members would know. The sister was convinced. She said it was like her brother had come back. So why isn't this front-page news? Why isn't psychology grappling with this data? The answer is uncomfortable. Science is a human endeavor, and humans have biases, belief systems, and career incentives. If you're a psychology researcher and you start taking reincarnation seriously, you risk your reputation. You'll be labeled a crackpot, your funding will dry up, and your colleagues will distance themselves from you. Academia punishes people who stray too far from accepted paradigms. This isn't a conspiracy, it's just how institutions work. They're conservative by nature, slow to change, resistant to ideas that threaten the status quo. And reincarnation is the ultimate status quo threat. If it's real, it means consciousness is not a byproduct of matter. It means materialism is incomplete. It means we need an entirely new framework for understanding human existence. That's a lot to ask scientists to accept, especially when their entire careers are built on the old framework. But let's play devil's advocate. Let's say there's some explanation we're missing, some normal process that accounts for all this. What could it be? Some researchers have proposed super psi, the idea that these children are somehow telepathically accessing information from living people's minds or even from some kind of collective unconscious. But this explanation is actually more far-fetched than reincarnation. We have no mechanism for how telepathy would work, no evidence that children can psychically scan the memories of strangers thousands of miles away, and no reason why this would only manifest as past life memories rather than random information overload. Plus, it doesn't explain the birthmarks, the phobias, or the personality traits. If a child is just picking up stray information telepathically, why would they develop a fear of water specifically related to a drowning they read about in someone else's mind? It doesn't make sense. Another theory is genetic memory, the idea that somehow memories are encoded in DNA and passed down through generations. But this also falls apart. Many of these children claim to be people they're not related to, sometimes from completely different ethnic backgrounds or geographic regions. There's no genetic link. And even if there were, we have no evidence that complex episodic memories can be stored in DNA. Genetic memory might explain instincts or vague impressions, but not detailed recollections of specific events, names, and places. The simplest explanation, the one that accounts for all the data without requiring implausible mechanisms, is that some aspect of consciousness survives death and can sometimes be reborn in a new body. Not always, not in every case, but sometimes. This doesn't prove any particular religious doctrine. It doesn't tell us what happens between lives, whether there's a judgment, a heaven, or a cosmic plan. It just suggests that consciousness is more than brain activity, that it has some existence independent of the physical body. And honestly, this shouldn't be that shocking. We already know consciousness is weird. We don't fully understand how subjective experience arises from neurons firing. The hard problem of consciousness, as philosophers call it, remains unsolved. So maybe the solution isn't that consciousness is produced by the brain, but that the brain is more like a receiver, a radio picking up a signal that exists independently. This has profound implications not just for science, but for how we live our lives. If consciousness continues after death, if we potentially live multiple lives, then our actions matter more deeply. The relationships we form, the kindness we show, the harm we cause, all of it might echo beyond this single existence. It changes the calculus of meaning. It suggests that life isn't just a brief, meaningless accident, but part of something larger, something we don't yet fully understand. And isn't that worth investigating? Isn't that worth taking seriously, even if it makes us uncomfortable? Modern psychology has built its entire edifice on the assumption that mind equals brain. Consciousness is neurons, memory is synapses, and personality is chemistry. And yes, there's truth to that. Brain damage affects consciousness, drugs alter perception, and neuroscience has mapped incredible correlations between brain states and mental states. But correlation isn't causation. Just because brain activity correlates with consciousness doesn't mean the brain produces consciousness. Your TV screen displays images, but it doesn't create the broadcast. Damage the TV, and the picture gets distorted, but the signal still exists. Maybe the brain works the same way. Maybe it's a filter, a lens through which consciousness experiences physical reality. And when the brain dies, consciousness doesn't end, it just moves on. The reincarnation research suggests exactly this. It suggests that consciousness is primary, not secondary. That we are not bodies that happen to be conscious, but consciousness that happens to inhabit bodies. And if that's true, then death isn't an ending but a transition. The body dies, but the experiencer, the awareness, the sense of I that you've had since childhood, that continues. It finds a new form, a new life, and usually forgets the previous one, but sometimes, in rare cases, the memory bleeds through. Children remember because their new brains haven't yet fully filtered out the old identity. As they grow and their current life takes over, the memories fade, buried under new experiences, new conditioning, new neural patterns. But for a brief window, there's overlap, and researchers who are paying attention can document it. This isn't faith. This isn't religion, this is data. It's evidence that demands explanation, and the fact that mainstream psychology refuses to engage with it says more about the limitations of current scientific paradigms than it does about the validity of the research. Science is supposed to follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if it leads to uncomfortable places. Yet here we have decades of careful documentation, thousands of cases, peer-reviewed publications, and the response from the broader scientific community is silence. That's not skepticism, that's avoidance. Skepticism would involve examining the evidence, attempting to replicate the findings, proposing testable alternative hypotheses, and conducting further research. Instead, we get dismissal, ridicule, and a refusal to even look at the data. That's not how science is supposed to work. So what should psychology do? First, it needs to acknowledge that consciousness research can't be limited by materialist dogma. We need to be open to the possibility that our current models are incomplete. Second, replication studies need to be funded and conducted. If this research is valid, it should be reproducible. Let's see independent teams investigate similar cases using the same rigorous methodology. Third, we need to explore mechanisms. If consciousness can survive death, what does that look like? Is there a non-physical substrate, some kind of information field, a quantum process we don't yet understand? These are legitimate scientific questions. And finally, we need to integrate this data with other lines of evidence. Near-death experiences, terminal lucidity in dementia patients, and cases of acquired savant syndrome, all of these phenomena point toward consciousness being more than just brain activity. Together, they paint a picture that challenges materialist assumptions and suggests a richer, stranger reality than we've been taught. Think about it. If consciousness is truly just neurons firing, then we're nothing more than biological machines, deterministic processes playing out according to the laws of physics. There's no free will, no meaning, no purpose beyond what we arbitrarily assign. But if consciousness transcends the physical, if it can exist independently of the body, then suddenly the universe looks very different. We're not accidents. We're part of something vast and mysterious, something that doesn't end when our hearts stop beating. And maybe, just maybe, the children who remember past lives are giving us a glimpse of that larger reality, a reality that science has been too afraid or too arrogant to investigate. Now here's the question I want you to think about. Have you ever had a memory that doesn't fit your life? A sense of knowing something you shouldn't know? A place you've never been that feels familiar? A person you just met who seems like an old friend? What if those aren't glitches but glimpses? What if your consciousness has been around longer than you think? Drop a comment and tell me about any experiences you've had that made you wonder if there's more to existence than this one life. I read every comment, and I want to hear your story. Look, I get it. This is heavy stuff. It challenges everything we've been taught about death, identity, and the nature of reality. But sometimes the most important truths are the ones that make us uncomfortable. The research is out there. The cases are documented. The evidence exists. Whether mainstream science chooses to acknowledge it or not, these children are remembering things they shouldn't be able to remember. Their stories are too accurate, too specific, too consistent to dismiss as coincidence or fraud. Something is happening here, something profound, and we owe it to ourselves to investigate with open minds and intellectual honesty. So here's what I want you to take away from this. Don't just accept the materialist narrative because it's the default. Question it. Look at the evidence. Read the research. And most importantly, stay curious. The universe is far stranger and more wonderful than we've been led to believe, and consciousness might just be the biggest mystery of all. If this video made you think, if it challenged your assumptions, or opened your mind to new possibilities, hit that like button. It helps more people discover this content. And if you want to keep exploring the frontiers of psychology, the topics that mainstream sources won't touch, subscribe to this channel. We're just getting started, and trust me, there's so much more to uncover. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.